And it's
Absolutely.
not so much a radical thing or a global warming thing as it is an economic thing and something that just makes sense because gasoline is such an inefficient fuel and it's now become expensive. Our vehicles can run for about $35 a month for most people who commute to work and back. And that's just a real world savings that people need to put back in their pockets. But it also is the right thing to do because gasoline is just a horrible fuel for the planet. Not
Yes.
like diesel fuel, which is much more efficient and can be made in a variety of natural ways, which really doesn't pollute.
Unless, if I,
But gasoline,
if I may interrupt, unless you've traveled to South America and if you've spent any time in Sao Paulo or Buenos Aires, you realize that diesel has its own evil that it brings with it along with.
well, it does. Petroleum diesel does, but biodiesel and vegetable oil diesel, which was Rudolph's original design, is not polluting, and it can be used in a non-food manner. In fact, the byproduct actually produce a very healthy food for cattle and pigs and chickens, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very efficient. You get about a 3-to-1 energy return on your investment when you drill into the ground, and you don't have to burn petroleum. There are much better uses for it. So that's been kind of the economic motivation behind what I've been doing. But also, I'm interested in other things. Of course, I'm interested in
Absolutely.
astrophysics of what's going on out there,
Yes.
in the geology of the Earth, involved with the Inner Earth expedition,
Yes.
and just learning to live as a planet instead of all the different ideologies that we've inherited from medieval times,
Right.
and for which we charge across the frozen tundra still to this day at each other. We're trying to perhaps use science and common sense to turn the planet into one world,
I think it's an
one world
affirmation.
ideology.
I think it's affirmation that the old axiom, the more things change, the more they stay the same, might very well be directly equated to man's inhumanity to man. Well, folks, I think that we might be having some Skype connection issues with Dr. Agnew. So I'm thinking that Don in the studio is going to keep an eye on that. And just in case we need to switch to a terrestrial phone line, landline, Don, I hope that you can make that arrangement while I set the stage for our conversation. And in particular, Dr. Agnew and I are going to begin with a discussion of what is known as Comet Elenin. Comet Elenin is a body that was discovered only recently, last December, planetary body. And we're going to spend a good length of time here talking about Elenin and discussing its significance for us, its impact with us, why it's relevant, and why we all need to be a lot more informed than maybe where we are at the moment. Now, folks, if you could imagine for a moment your schedule for the next 7 calendar days, I think a lot of us, I think, have a good sense of what our schedule will look like, how busy we are. For most of us, I think that our next 7 days, we know that we're going to be spending involved in work. We have maybe some plans, family events, functions, taking the kids to activities that they're involved in. But what we need to understand is that in the matter of a heartbeat, at the drop of a dime, our priorities in life, our sense of priorities can change significantly. Imagine, for example, if you had the unfortunate news somehow that maybe you only had 1 week left to live. Imagine how suddenly and significantly your plans for this next week would change in that eventuality. Of course, you would have a whole new sense of prioritization, urgency for some tasks as opposed to others. Now, your humble host is not trying to imply that we only have a week to live, not at all. But it is an idea, it brings our awareness to the notion that new information sometimes can cause our entire world, seemingly, to turn upside down, and that we need to be aware of these sort of things. So, With that having been said, our discussion, our conversation will focus around the comet Elenin and its implications for us.
Oh, are you talking to me? I'm here. We've switched over to the phone line instead of a Skype line.
Well, Dr. Agnew, I actually lost my feedback from the studio in my headphones, so I think I was talking to myself for a while, but if I was talking to you too, it's my pleasure and honor.
That's okay.
Don in the
All
studio,
right.
if you could give me any indication if I've just spent the last 5 minutes talking to myself here, like a crazy man I usually do in my hotel room. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Well, Brooks, I'm not sure if you had a chance to hear my sort of my setup,
I did.
but okay, we're going to be talking about Elenin, and sir, I recently heard you make about the most cogent presentation of where we today, from a scientific or academic standpoint, what we know about comet Elenin and what we maybe don't know and we're not quite so sure about. Could I ask you to just sort of charge in and help set the foundation for folks to become aware and or more familiar with Elenin?
Well, let me first qualify things by telling your listeners that I am not an astrophysicist, but I am intensely. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. I'm not an astrophysicist, but I am intensely interested in what's going on. And so I began to do my research on this about 3 or 4 months ago when I first heard that it was showing up. And not so much because I research every single comet, but this one is so strange in the sense that it is planar in its approach to our solar system. That's very strange with respect to comets. Usually they're more perpendicular to the plane of our solar system. We see them light up as they get close enough to the sun that they start off-gassing, and then the tail and the head begin to reflect sunlight, and then we can see them as kind of a foggy space cloud out there. Sometimes you can watch them with binoculars, or sometimes they're visible by the naked eye, as Hale-Bopp was.
Sure.
But this one is not approaching our solar system that way. It's approaching from the same plane as the planets, which leads me to believe it's probably not a comet, because comets all originate out of a kind of a cometary maelstrom that exists outside our solar system. This one has a different source, obviously. The second thing that's very strange about it is normally when comets get close to other gravitational bodies, there's a process called the Roche limit. This is where the gravity of a planet overcomes the internal gravity of the comet, and the comet begins to come apart. That is to say, the head breaks into a series of chunks. We saw that during the Schumacher comet as it got close to Jupiter. Jupiter's gravity overtook the internal gravity of the comet. It fell apart, and it actually struck Jupiter in a series of about a dozen big chunks that we saw hit the planet, and we observed them as huge explosions as they hit the planet.
Sure. Yep.
But this one's not breaking apart like that. It isn't off-gassing normally. It isn't breaking apart normally, which means the head has a lot of structure. That is to say, it's not a bunch of frozen gas or water lumped together in a local mass that's charging through space, like something that has its own integrity. And the other thing is that the number of photographs that exist for this thing total one photograph.
Yes.
Elenin was a comet, and it did exist, and it was on our plane of our planets, and it did show up in one photograph. There are amateur scopes out there that are plenty good.
Yes.
We should have 1,000 photographs of that thing floating around, but we don't. We have one.
Quite right.
And that's what's really got me alarmed. Something doesn't fit about this this body called Elenin. The other thing is I can't find anything out about Elenin, about the scientist that supposedly discovered it. Does this guy even exist?
Leonid Elenin is his name. I have actually come across a photograph of Mr. Elenin, but in part, I think, and towards support of your comment, it is quite interesting that despite, let's say, his tenure or body of experience in the field, that he was the one that made this observation in somewhat, non-customary circumstances, is my finding. But I wonder, Dr. Agnew, if we could maybe hold our further exploration of that thread for a bit. How about if we do this? I'd like to kind of set a basic table for the listeners. If you could jump in and either add a little bit to what I'm about to share, or set me straight if the need be, and usually it is. But let's kind of tell people what Elenin is. It's a long period comet. And by one estimation, I've heard that the period, meaning its total orbit, it's the time it takes to make a complete orbit in its own cycle, is 11,700 years. By one other estimate, I've heard that may be shorter, to the tune of 9,900 years. Are we on the right track so far?
We're on the right track, which means that the distances that we're talking about orbiting our sun are in the realm of 50 billion miles.
That's a long way to go for Chicken McNuggets, but comets are happy to make the trip, right?
Well, like I said, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I would say that I'd be hard pressed to believe that our sun could have a gravitational influence on something 50 billion miles away.
Yes. Well, continuing kind of with our introduction to Elenin, at the time of the discovery, and it is attributed to Leonid Elenin, the discovery on December 10th, 2010, so really only a matter of months ago. At the time of the discovery, the apparent magnitude, which is the term that refers to its brightness, how bright is that thing in the sky? We think of the sun, we think of the moon, we think of our familiar stars, Venus, Mars, etc. We measure their brightness to the human eye from the face of the earth as its apparent magnitude. At that time, it was 19.5. Now, the apparent magnitude scale, as the numbers get smaller, the object is more bright to the human eye.
That's right. And it can go negative. So as it gets to -1, -2, -3, you start getting to the brightness of, say, the space station or Venus.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And over the course of this now actually 7 months since the initial discovery, our measurements, our estimates, our understanding of Elenin, they seem to be evolving quite rapidly, don't they?
Yes.
For example,
well, go ahead.
Well, for example, I'm finding that just about 6 weeks ago, or maybe 7 weeks, the new apparent magnitude was measured at 15. So from 19.5 down to 15 in that span, which at a magnitude of 15, it's roughly the brightness of Pluto.
Which would still take a pretty powerful scope and a large mirror, because you got to gather a lot of light to be able to see something of that tiny amount of magnitude. But there still should be more than one image of it out there.
Absolutely. And I can't express to you how quickly I would like to get to exactly that thread. But just to kind of finish setting the stage a bit, I'm also seeing that Leonid Elenin, the discoverer, estimates that the comet nucleus is 3 to 4 kilometers in diameter. Now, I find that to be interesting because they further estimate that the coma of the comet, C-O-M-A, the coma of the comet, the coma of the comet is accounting for the quote-unquote so-called dust cloud being generated by the main body of the comet. And so if you picture a comet in your mind,